And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January the 7th day of the year. Just 358 days remain to the year so over with, and we'll do it again. Holidays and observances. National Tempura Day. Batter and deep fry a wide range of foods from prawns to vegetables and pair it with Japanese staples like donburi or soba for some delicious eating. National Bobblehead Day. Talking about those fun, oversized head-bobbing collectibles. Harlem Globetrotter Day. These basketball entertainers with jaw-dropping skills never fail to fascinate. Aleo Parade. It's a joyful, colorful event, fills the streets with music and costumes and a real festive spirit. Participants of all ages, dressed in traditional attire, march through cities and villages, singing carols and carrying icons and flags. The air is filled with the sound of Allelo, a Georgian carol that expresses joy and hope. Old Rock Day discovered the beauty and history of the earth with these timeless treasures. National Pass Gas Day. Certainly have a lot of gas coming out of Congress. I'm not going to take it anymore day. Standing tall and refusing to accept what's wrong and pushing for what's right. It's about making things fair for everybody. National Distaff Day. Invisible Pain Day. Coptic Christmas. For those that are part of the Coptic Orthodox Church, today is Christmas, marked with joy and reverence, honors the birth of Jesus Christ and is a time of spiritual reflection and communal gathering. Not everybody celebrates it on December 25th, Orthodox Christmas Day. Same as the Coptic Christmas. Zagreb Advent, Artes Mundi, Diet Resolution Week, and National Silent Record Week. Famous people born on this date: Nicolas Cage, Jeremy Renner, and the one and only Scarface, Al Capone. Yes, this was his birthday. Well, all that having been said, let us see what stories we have in the news. It's, members of the group called the Squad. One of the representatives' felon husband knocks the phone out of the hand of a reporter asking about the Minnesota fraud. Squad Representative Ayanna Presley's ex-con husband just lost it, slapped the phone out of the hand of a reporter as he tries to ask a question. She is known as being fairly outspoken, member of the Progressive Squad of Lawmakers. The interviewer started out, "Congresswoman Presley, do you support?" And had his phone out to record her response before Conan Harris, Presley's husband, who spent 10 years in prison on felony drug charges, smacked the phone out of the questioner's hand. The individual that was trying to ask the question said, "You can't take my phone out of my hand." Well, Harris just ignored him, continued as if he had not even spoken. Well, James Comer going to accuse Tim Walsh of being asleep at the wheel at a fraud hearing. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, going to accuse top Minnesota government officials of being asleep at the wheel at the start of his panel's high-profile hearing into alleged fraud. In his opening statement obtained by Fox News, he's expected to question whether Governor Walsh, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minnesota's Democratic leadership were negligent or complicit in the growing scandal. He said Minnesota's social services, which were funded by you, the American taxpayer, were being ripped off. The most vulnerable are suffering as a result. And the fraudsters, many of whom come out of the Minnesota Somali community, have stolen from programs meant to feed needy kids, provide services to autistic children, and house low-income and disabled Americans. And they're still getting away with it. Well, the Golden Globes host, Nikki Glaser, names the one Hollywood star you can't make fun of. The one A-lister that she doesn't dare to roast when she comes back as host of the Golden Globes Award on Sunday. This 41-year-old comedian, who became the first woman to host the award ceremony solo last year, was tapped as MC again after earning overwhelming positive reviews for the debut. And during a Tuesday appearance on CBS Mornings, Glaser shed some light on what the awards attendees and reviewers can expect from her performances this year. She said she had been testing her material for the upcoming show at some of her stand-up gigs and admitted there was one star she'd avoid mocking. And you can't make fun of America's sweetheart. Whatever I end up saying about her is the most fine-tuned joke that I've worked on so hard because it's very delicate. The America's sweetheart, of course, is Julia Roberts. Well, Vice President J.D. Vance reposted a sombrero meme mocking Democrats' January 6th candlelight vigil. They just cannot seem to let go of what they believe was President Trump's attempt to overthrow the government. And he reposted content that added sombreros to images of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, as they held candles on the steps of the Capitol. Vance posted the image from his verified X account without commentary, showing Democratic leaders, including Schumer and Jeffries, prominently from a video clip. I guess if they got nothing else to do with their time, it keeps them out of trouble standing on the steps of the Capitol. Well, Minnesota hotel has been removed from approved federal lodging list after allegedly refusing to accommodate ICE agents. Its General Services Administration said it's terminating the Hampton Inn, Lakeville in Minnesota from its list of approved lodging sites for federal employees after the hotel refused to accommodate ICE agents and immigration officers. Hilton, who is the parent of that particular chain, said that did not keep with their way of doing things, but the Lakeville Hampton Inn marches to a different drummer. Well, President Trump has unleashed what he calls the Donroe Doctrine and put socialists on notice worldwide. He said, for the past 26 years, we witnessed the devastating impact of socialism on the Venezuelan people. Today, we're filled with hope as we watch President Trump take action to end that nightmare. A lot of non-Venezuelan groups support the socialist actions. My wife got pictures of folks being forced to work in the fields. I'm talking about doctors and lawyers. And she posted them on Facebook to send to her friends. And Zuckerberg's people just had a meltdown. Banned her. And I was banned for using the word alien. I was talking about the little green men, but they assumed I was talking about folks from south of the border, and they banned me as well. Well, President Trump's actions in Venezuela are necessary and entirely lawful, grounded in well-established U.S. precedents for intervention in the Western Hemisphere. And drawing from historical examples such as the 1983 invasion of Grenada to rescue Americans and halt a communist coup, and the 1989 invasion of Panama to oust the drug trafficking dictator Manuel Noriega, He's got plenty of legal authority, but the Democrats are just having a complete and total meltdown. Well, the Maduro arrest sends a clear message to drug cartels and allies and U.S. rivals, according to one retired admiral. The arrest of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro is expected to have a lasting impact on his home country, but experts say it could also reshape how the U.S. and other neighbors get along going forward, especially with increased cooperation battling a plague of drug traffickers. If you'll remember, U.S. forces captured Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, in a raid on the presidential palace in Caracas over the weekend. They appeared in court and pled not guilty to narco-terrorism and other charges in a Manhattan courtroom on Monday. According to U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Robert Harward, former SEAL and member of the former President George Bush's National Security Council, I see a realignment and re-emphasis on cartels. Now, the Trump administration's decisive takedown of a suspected narco-terrorist and illegitimate leader shows a marked change in U.S. foreign policy. Years after former President Obama's ineffectual red lines in Syria. And a lot of the problems we're dealing with today were caused by the man that so many look at as a living God, and that's Barack Obama. Now, let's see what else we got. Representative LaMalfia's death further strengthens the Republican House majority. He's a Republican in California. His death strengthened the Republican majority in the House of Representatives to the minimum of 218 seats, representing fresh challenges for Speaker Mike Johnson as the party heads into an election year. LaMalfa, 65, died suddenly on Tuesday during emergency surgery. Staunch ally of President Trump, a reliable vote for Johnson's priorities. His death now means that Johnson can only lose 2 Republican votes and still pass legislation along party lines. Well, Mamdani's top housing pick once called home ownership a weapon of white supremacy. In a resurfaced tweet and video clip, a top housing official in newly minted New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's administration previously called home ownership a weapon of white supremacy and argued that property ought to be treated as a collective good. In other words, you may buy it, but you don't own it. And that homeless guy on the side of the street has as much right to live in your house as you do. C.L. Weaver, longtime housing activist and member of the Democratic Socialists of America, was tapped by Mamdani to be as director of the mayor's office to protect tenants. Now that is a laughing term if I ever heard one. Since taking office, she's gone viral for several weeks and come up with a number of tweets she posted on her since-deleted X account. A screenshot of an August 21st, 2019 tweet showed her writing that private property, including and kind of especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy masquerading as wealth-building public policy. And in an earlier tweet from December 18, 2017, she called on voters to elect more communists. And these are the people we're choosing to lead the government of the biggest city in the world. Well, a massive luxury handbag heist was caught on camera as heavily armed police swarm a California store. California officials announced Tuesday that authorities have arrested 2 individuals after video captured suspects trying to nab nearly $100,000 worth of luxury handbags from a retail store. The Irvine Police Department released footage showing what appears to be heavily armed officers foiling a brazen burglary as 2 suspects dressed in black hoodies and face masks tried to flee with an armful of designer items. Authorities said police responded to reports of a burglary early this morning when security staff alerted officers of the troubling incident. There's a luxury handbag store in the area of Jamboree and DuPont. Building security alerted officers 2 people had seen on surveillance entering the building. The suspects were identified as Richard Bernard Spencer, 40, of Los Angeles, and Marcellus Rennell Shelby, 30, of Hollywood. They were seen scaling a tall wall before entering the building, and then appeared to enter a luxury store that carried popular brands such as Celine and Givenchy. And then they were spotted by security cameras trying to leave through an emergency exit door while carrying numerous bags before suddenly pivoting toward a flight of stairs and running up to the floor above. Well, they didn't get away with it, luckily. Well, California residents face brutal choices a year after Los Angeles fires destroyed their lives. Only 25 to 30% plan to rebuild as insurance disputes, infrastructure delays force families to abandon 60-year-old homes. Longtime Pacific Palisades resident Jana Cole and her husband say they consider themselves lucky. She said, "What really breaks my heart is for people like our next-door neighbor. They're in their late 70s, early 80s, and lived in their house for 60 years. It was their original home, and they were pillars of the community, and people like that aren't coming back." January 7th marks the one-year anniversary of the start of the deadly Los Angeles wildfires, Palisades and Eaton fires. Though the fires are contained by the end of the month, Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation reports they caused up to $53.8 billion in property damage alone. The department's research also found extraordinary high destruction rates, with the Palisades fire destroying 56.3% of all assessed structures and 55.8% of single-family homes. And the Eaton fire destroyed about 50% of all structures in single-family homes. And of course, the governor, who is a man who's never seen a mirror he doesn't stop and look in, is doing nothing to help the residents of California. Well, Trump-friendly comedians are warning the GOP they're going to lose the midterms if the president keeps failing promises of MAGA agenda. Podcasters and comedians Theo Von and Dave Smith spoke Tuesday about how President Trump and the GOP will meet disaster in the midterms unless they enact the promises he ran on. He won a historic victory after what some have called the podcast election, where he appeared on numerous podcasts that appeal to young men. Now some of these same podcast hosts are arguing that Trump has failed to enact the America First agenda he ran on. While Smith argued on Theo Von's The Past Weekend podcast Trump has secured the border after the previous administration mishandled it, he's fallen very short on other issues. Well, there's a little-known prescription pill that's helping Americans drink less alcohol. Recent studies continue to support a decades-old drug as an alternative means of reducing alcohol consumption. The prescription opioid pill called naltrexone is first approved by the FDA to treat opioid dependence in 1984. And a decade later, it was approved for alcohol use disorder. In addition to the daily pill version, naltrexone is also available as a monthly injectable therapy, which is approved for alcohol use disorder in 2006 and opioid use disorder in 2010. And that much interactions I've had with my primary care physician, never heard of that. Well, expired Obamacare subsidy deals inching closer on the Senate floor amid bipartisan talks. Bipartisan group of senators still working on a fix for the now expired Obamacare subsidies and believe they may be nearing a proposal that could hit the Senate floor. This group that met a handful of times during Congress's holiday break adjourned once more behind closed doors on Monday night. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and Bernie Moreno, Republican of Ohio, leading the talks among several Senate Republicans and Democrats looking for a compromise solution. Yes, that's what the Obamacare subsidies is one of the reasons we had the shutdown. Well, Riley Gaines debuted a Fox News podcast after rebranding to expand her reach and impact. She says the new podcast is part of God's plan. He prepares those who he calls. She's a former NCAA swimmer who became a leading voice opposing transgender participation in women's sports. Said she never dreamed about hosting her own podcast, and here she is. Riley Gaines' show debuted Wednesday with a timely interview with independent journalist Nick Shirley, who went viral for putting a spotlight on alleged fraud and what's taking place in Minnesota. The much-anticipated launch comes after Gaines previously hosted Outback's Gaines for Girls, but her show had been rebranded in conjunction with Fox News Media's new media expansion. It also includes The Ruthless and the Will Kane Country. Well, the last review were heard in over 63 countries around the world. And certainly I've had no political aspirations, but I'm trying to give people what they want. Well, Iran is on the brink as protesters move to take 2 cities, and some have even appealed to President Trump. Iranian protesters issued a direct appeal for help from President Trump Tuesday as unrest continued to spiral across that nation for the 10th day. That appeal, which was shared on X, showed a woman holding up a sign with the words, "Trump, a symbol of peace, don't let him kill us," written on the sign. Woman's cry for help came amid reports of at least 29 deaths and more than 1,200 arrests, according to the human rights activist news agency. It also reported an escalation in force by security units, including the use of pellet guns and tear gas and direct assault on demonstrators. The National Council of Resistance of Iran also claimed the cities Abdina in the Ilam province and Alek Shahi are effectively taken over by the protesters. I heard a rumor that the Ayatollah is looking for a place to go hide. We'll see if there's anything truth to that. Well, if you ever wanted to live in a castle, there's a medieval castle with 100 rooms that's just hit the market with nearly 1,000 years of history. It's a French castle with a high listing price that few folks can afford. But it has a history of nearly 1,000 years and may interest some folks. La Château de la Verdière, located in the southeast region of Provence, boasts 100 rooms, plus the courtyards and terraces and olive groves, and even a helipad. The rooms include historic salons, reception rooms, and vaulted medieval rooms in the 13th century Romanesque church, among other features. It includes 53,820 square feet of living space and nearly 40 acres of land. So if you ever wanted to have your very own castle, here's the place to do it. Well, a missing South Carolina teenager, Mackenzie Dalton, has been found safe after a month-long search led to an arrest. She went missing late last year, been found safe, and a man's been arrested in the case. Lexington County Sheriff's Office said Mackenzie Dalton, 16, was found in Lexington County after an investigation into her disappearance. Deputy said there's no indication she was ever held against her will or was somebody she didn't want to be with. She was reported missing after she was last seen leaving her home in late November, according to a January 2nd statement from the Sheriff's Office. At that time, authorities said she was considered an endangered juvenile due to her age and the length of time she'd been gone. Investigators previously said they believed Dalton may have been with a man she knew, although authorities didn't release that man's identity. The teen was described as 5'4" and weighed 118 pounds. Well, the deputies arrested Mackenzie Keith English Jr., 18, and charged him with obstruction of justice during their investigation. Authorities accused English of lying to investigators about being with Dalton about his knowledge about her whereabouts. He's being held in the Lexington County Detention Center. But she has been returned to her home. See how long she stays there. 7 U.S. service members were injured in Venezuela raid to capture Maduro, according to an official. That's different than a previous report. It said nobody was injured. 5 service members already returned to duty, and 2 are still recovering from the operation. They're getting excellent medical care and are well on their way to recovery, according to officials. fact that this extremely complex and grueling mission was successfully executed with so few injuries is a testament to the expertise of our joint warriors. On Saturday, service members landed in Caracas during a secretive mission to strike Venezuelan territory and capture Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, known as Operation Absolute Resolve. Don't you love those names? Mission is led by the Army Elite Special Operations Unit Delta Force. Officials said Tuesday 24 Venezuelan security officials were killed during the raid, along with 32 Cuban military and police officers who were responsible for guarding Maduro. Venezuelan officials claim the operation also killed civilians, but those claims haven't been independently verified. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Trump ordered the apprehension mission Friday night, and it involved 150 planes, including B-1 Lancer bombers and helicopters from 20 different bases. But it was successful. Well, Cracker Barrel, which is our favorite restaurant, or was, caves to customer pressure as it brings back menu favorites nationwide. Now putting the old back in the old country store and returns to 2 classic menu items. Tennessee-based restaurant chain, I actually went to the first one years ago, revealed Tuesday its hamburger steak plus its eggs in the basket, both comfort food staples, are coming back by popular demand. Winter calls for comfort and connection, and nothing delivers it better than these 2 classics, according to Thomas Young, Cracker Barrel's Vice President of Menu Strategy and Innovation. Don't you love some of these crazy titles that folks come up with? Well, Venezuelan Dark Fleet tanker evades U.S. Coast Guard as Russia sends submarines to escort that vessel. Venezuelan-linked oil tanker operating in the so-called Dark Fleet painted a Russian flag on its hull, changed its name, and reflagged to Russia in an apparent bid to evade the U.S. Coast Guard, according to RAW reports. It was spotted off the coast of Ireland, with the U.S., UK, France, and Ireland reportedly conducting aerial surveillance after it escaped U.S. interception in December. We're going to wind up with an international shooting war. Well, there was a 911 call at Ohio dentist home reporting domestic dispute months before he and his wife were found shot dead. Months before the dentist and his wife were found dead in Ohio, a woman called 911 from the same address to report what the dispatcher described as a domestic dispute. After hanging up initially, the caller told the 911 operator, "Me and my man got into it," according to newly obtained records. Police responded to the Columbus, Ohio house about 10 o'clock in the morning on December 30th when they found Spencer Tepe, 37, and Monique Tepe, 39, both dead with apparent gunshot wounds. There were 2 young children located inside the house unharmed. Police don't believe the deaths were a murder-suicide, adding to no signs of forced entry, and no weapon was found. So the obvious choice of cause would be homicide. Well, the Pelosi heir apparent, calling President Trump's Venezuelan move a lawless coup, and urges he be impeached, and he slammed Netanyahu at the same time. San Francisco Democrat demanded impeachment of President Trump, accusing him of carrying out a coup against Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro. California State Senator Scott Weiner, seen as likely congressional successor to Representative Nancy Pelosi, also took a swipe at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Weiner has frequently drawn national attention for his progressive positions, including his legislation signed by Governor Newsom designated California as a refugee for transgender children. Remarks at the San Francisco Pride Month event referring to California's children as our kids. In a lengthy public statement after the Trump administration's arrest and extradition of Maduro to New York, Weiner said the move shows the president only cares about enriching his public donors and cares nothing for the human or economic cost of conquering another country. Well, it's been my experience that these ultra-leftists who come up with these crazy things to talk about are just looking to feather their own nest and don't really understand the realities of the world. Well, there's an individual who fled the Hunger Games of Cuba only to watch free Americans cheer communism. Cuban influencers Joel and Maria Diaz erupted in celebration after the news broke of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's capture. And known for their unapologetic critiques of communism, the Arizona-based couple has built a large social media following about contrasting life under leftist regimes with the freedoms they say come with capitalism in the United States. Well, that's just like the man in the previous story I talked about. He's so pro-communist, he doesn't really understand because he has no experience as what it's like to live under a communist regime. Well, Rumble launches a crypto wallet to let creators get paid directly by viewers using digital funds. Rumble said Tether announced Wednesday the launch of a new digital wallet system that allows users and creators to send, receive, and store cryptocurrency directly on the platform. You don't have to use a bank or a third-party payment service. This technology has been called the Rumble Wallet. It allows creators to be paid directly by viewers. This could potentially reduce fees and minimize the risk of payment restrictions or account shutdowns. The company said financial independence is closely tied to its broader mission of protecting free expression online. Well, that used to be what Zuckerberg and his group said about their creation. It had the exact opposite effect. Well, UK and France strike a new Ukraine security pact as U.S. takes the lead in ceasefire enforcement. UK and France signed a declaration Tuesday pledging troops for Ukraine under future peace deal with security guarantees supported by the U.S. and allied partners. The declaration was adopted in Paris by the Coalition of the Willing and sets out what leaders said was a framework for lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia, set in international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 triggered Europe's largest conflict since World War II. Doesn't really show any signs of winding down. Well, common pain relievers may raise heart disease and stroke risk, according to doctors. Many might assume the over-the-counter medication is generally safer than stronger prescription drugs, but research shows they can still present some risk for some folks. Certain common over-the-counter painkillers have been linked to an increased risk of high blood pressure, stroke, and heart attack. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, said to be used to reduce pain and fever and inflammation, have been pinpointed as a class of medicines most linked to elevated cardiovascular risk. This is because they reduce the production of certain chemicals called prostaglandins. According to Mayim Zalza, MD, an anesthesiologist at UNC Health in North Carolina. These chemicals are involved in inflammation, but they're also involved in other bodily functions, such as influencing the tone of blood vessels. Well, hundreds of tourists have been stranded on a remote island as troops are pulled from the conflict zone. Conflict in Yemen has prompted air traffic halts, leaving about 600 tourists stranded on a remote island. United Arab Emirates withdrew its troops last week after following a deadline from Saudi Arabia. And this action left tourists on the island of Socotra, according to Reuters. Well, on that note, let us pivot to our main topic for today. We're going to talk about some more strangeness. And certainly, one of the new books that I've just come out with was called An American Coup. And it went into some detail about the Kennedy assassination and how it was actually a coup. Now, there's a lot of investigation of the Kennedy assassination. It's been ongoing since the echoes stopped at Dealey Plaza. But when you're counting down history's top conspiracies, there's only one that everybody agrees should be on that list. In fact, when it comes to decoding mysteries, the number one request has to be the assassination of JFK. And certainly, you can't do justice to the JFK assassination in a simple magazine article. It's so packed with craziness, it needed its very own book. And I've written, I got a new series called The Assassination Files. You can get it at Amazon. Go to Amazon Kindle, look up Ken Hudnall, and you'll find An American Coup. Now, no matter how much evidence there is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, it's not going to stop people from thinking JFK's death was the result of a massive conspiracy. And it's absolutely mind-blowing just how many conspiracy theories surround the assassination. Although the number isn't surprising, especially when you consider that there's possibly no single event in modern history it's been as relentlessly investigated. And those investigations may actually be the biggest part of the problem. Put together all the official investigative commissions and reports and official reinvestigations, independent reviews of the evidence, journalistic inquiries, reenactments, documentaries, movies, and thousands of books, not to mention countless off-the-wall and over-the-top websites. You got a situation that's a perfect breeding ground for confusion, differing interpretations, allegations, and refutations. Now, when the Kennedys arrived at Rubb Field, November 22nd, 1963, they left the plane and headed for a fence by the airfield where a group of fans and supporters was waiting. And for quite some time, the 46-year-old president and the First Lady shook hands and thanked folks for coming. Somebody gave the First Lady a bouquet of red roses, which she brought into the limousine. Texas Governor John Connally and his wife were already sitting inside the car. The President and First Lady sat behind them. And since the rain had stopped, Secret Service didn't see the need for the plastic protective bubble that could be put on the car. Metal armor, bulletproof glass, and other countermeasures weren't even thought about until after this particular day. According to what President Kennedy said the morning of his death, if somebody wants to shoot me from a window with a rifle, nobody can stop it, so why worry about it? Well, the trip to downtown Dallas was only about 10 miles. Not very far at all. As the motorcade arrived, crowds packed both sides of the street, waving flags and craning necks and eager to spot the young president and his beautiful wife, dressed in that stylish pink suit. At about 12:30 in the afternoon, the presidential limo turned off Main Street at Dealey Plaza, making its way past the 7-story red brick building at the corner of Houston and Elm Streets. That's the Texas School Book Depository. It was going 11.25 miles per hour at that point in time. Within 6 seconds from the 6th floor window, at least 3 shots rang out. The president's hands moved to his neck, and the bullet entered his neck to the right of his spine. The final shots struck him in the head, which exploded, and the nation was changed forever. Well, throughout the course of history, there have been more than 24 assassination attempts on the President of the United States. 4 have been successful. Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and John Kennedy. But only Kennedy's death took place in the age of modern communications as millions of people watched the events on nationwide TV. The networks almost immediately turned their attention to Dallas, coming on the air with live reports while there was still hope that President Kennedy himself might still be alive. Think about just that. Days after Lincoln was murdered, there was still a substantial portion of the population who thought that Lincoln was still alive. In the case of JFK, the whole world knew the moment the doctors pronounced him dead. The only thing to compare it to would be the hours immediately after the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. We all know where we were at. We can call it in a heartbeat. And like 9/11, as fast as the news swirled was as fast as the conspiracy theories began to proliferate. And it was the same in 1963. This was at the height of the Cold War. Suspicion immediately turned to the Soviet Union or its public state China. Militaries put on alert. For all we knew, the United States was about to be attacked. Nuclear war seemed imminent. Well, within 80 minutes of the assassination, an arrest had been made. Lee Harvey Oswald, young 24-year-old high school dropout who'd worked at the book depository. He'd worked there for a month, since mid-October. On the morning of the shooting, he was seen carrying a long wrapped package, which he claimed contained curtain rods. After the shooting, on the 6th floor of the book depository, 3 bullet casings were found on the ground, as well as a Mannlicher Carcano rifle. Though I will point out, the rifle initially shown in photographs was not a Mannlicher Carcano. Less than 2 minutes after the shooting, police officer Marion Baker ran into the depository and with the building superintendent ran upstairs. On the second-story landing, Baker ordered a man who was 20 feet away to stop and walk to him. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when the building superintendent, Roy Truly, identified him as a fellow employee, Oswald was allowed to leave. In fact, when police ran into the break room, Oswald was sitting there drinking a Coke. Well, no question, Oswald matched the description of a slender man, 5'10", who aimed a rifle at the president from the upper story of the depository. And that description is quickly transmitted to the Dallas police. This is why 45 minutes after the shooting, police officer J.D. Tippett had words with a man matching that description. And that man fired 3 shots across the hood of Tippett's police car and then came around back and fired a 4th shot into Tippett's head, killing him instantly. An hour and 20 minutes after the assassination, less than 30 minutes after Officer Tippett was killed, Oswald was seen at the Hardy Shoe Store, where store manager Johnny Brewer noticed him acting suspicious and nervous. Brewer followed him to a local Dallas movie theater, which to this day, considering what happened, was itself a suspicious place to be. Dallas police entered the theater. Lee Harvey Oswald pulled out his revolver, but police prevented him from firing. I'm told by folks who were close to the investigation that revolver didn't even have a firing pin. So if he was supposed to be killed as a result of the assassination, pulling a gun with no firing pin against upset police officers is a great way to be killed. At 2:02 p.m., Oswald arrived at Dallas Police Headquarters. At 2:38, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States. By 3 p.m., the police were at Oswald's house. They asked Oswald's wife, who at the time was staying at a friend's house in Irving, Texas, if her husband owned a gun. She said he did, and when she went to show him officers where it was gone. In addition, Oswald left his money, $170, on the dresser in the room where his wife was staying, along with his wedding ring. For some reason, on that particular day, he didn't want either of those items with him. Well, the rifle that became a prize exhibit of the Warren Commission was the Mannlicher Carcano. 3 shell casings found on the 6th floor of the book depository came from this gun. All bullet fragments from the victims in the presidential limousine were matched to this same rifle, as well as the bullet fragments found at the site of the attempted murder of General Edwin Walker. Allegedly, Oswald tried to kill him April 10, 1963. The gun had been ordered from a mail-order house in Chicago and was shipped to somebody named A. Hudnall at P.O. Box 2915 in Dallas. When he was arrested, Oswald was carrying a fake ID, selective service card, and with the name Alec James Hudnall on it. Documentation used to order the gun said, and to rent a P.O. box matched Oswald's handwriting. And the other person who was authorized to pick up mail at that P.O. box, Oswald's Russian-born wife, Marina. And the name Alec, that's what Marina called Lee, since there was no equivalent for the name Lee in Russian. But of all that evidence about the gun, the most damning of it all is Oswald's palm print was found on the gun, on a part of the rifle that could only be touched when the gun wasn't assembled. So that does raise interesting questions. After the shooting in schools and movie theaters, we've almost become accustomed to 20-somethings sociopaths who are delusional in their self-importance and need to prove their cause through violence. But as the details of Oswald's life were revealed, that didn't smell like another lone wolf. He's been called a Marine sharpshooter, but actually, according to his record, he wasn't that good a shot. Back in 1959, after leaving the Marines, he moved to the Soviet Union and tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship. When the Soviets denied him citizenship, he attempted suicide. He didn't come back to the U.S. till 1961, which meant he spent 2 years in the Soviet Union. 2 years to meet people there, make friends, and become part of America's greatest enemy. So how could you not ask whether or not he was a part of the KGB, or maybe he was a scripted assassin? It didn't help when right after the shooting, as the press was shouting questions at Oswald and he's been taken from the jail elevator to the homicide and robbery office of the police department, he responded, "I'm just a patsy." And then, of course, there was that photo, and according to public opinion, the famous Life cover article sealed Oswald's fate. He's not only holding a rifle and wearing a pistol, he's holding 2 Marxist newspapers, proof he could be working for somebody else, which would be all you'd need to prove a conspiracy. Others said the picture was doctored, and I would submit that goes even further to prove a conspiracy. In fact, in Oliver Stone's JFK, a government agent has shown doctoring the photograph, and Jim Garrison is heard to say that the shadow on the face doesn't match the shadow on the body. More evidence of a conspiracy, but except for the fact the government experts said the duplicating photograph causes barely perceptible changes that account for such differences, and concluded no forgery was involved. So when the full-frame photo was examined by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, it was determined to have been taken with Oswald's Imperial Reflex camera to the exclusion of all other cameras. But there were so many questions raised by the activity of the Warren Commission itself that you really have to wonder how much of what we were told was true. How about the fact that Oswald sent a copy of the photo to his friend George de Mohrenschildt and wrote a message on it? But I would submit that handwriting can be faked as well. So maybe listen to Oswald's wife Marina repeatedly testify she took that photo at his request. But you have to keep in mind that Marina allegedly hated him. No matter how much proof you bring, there's always another argument that comes up. And in many ways, whether you see Oswald as master assassin or complete patsy, his biggest problem is going to be the fact he was murdered as well. He would never get a trial. 6 years after he fired someone fired the infamous shots from the 6th floor window, General D. Harold Byrd, the wealthy Texas oil man who owned the book depository, made a slight modification to the building. Had the actual window removed, saying he didn't want the vandals to steal it. So where'd he put it? Well, believe it or not, he framed it and hung it up in his own mansion. In 1970, another Southern eccentric, Aubrey Mayhew, bought the building. According to Mayhew, Bird's handyman actually removed the wrong window. Mayhew says he has the right window, which he also removed. Where'd both windows wind up? On eBay, of course. Where else would something be sold in this country? Well, it's interesting to note that there are 2 Southern hotshots fighting over which one has the actual window the shots were fired through. Well, on Sunday morning, 2 days after JFK was killed, just after 10 in the morning, Lee Harvey Oswald was set to be transferred from police headquarters to the county jail. And before the transfer, he was to receive a 3rd interrogation, this time by the Secret Service, the FBI, and Captain John Will Fritz, head of Dallas's homicide section. And according to David Bellin, who was a counsel to the Warren Commission, if nobody else had joined the group, Oswald had been transferred long before Jack Ruby ever got downtown. But at the last minute, Postal Inspector Harry Holmes, who had helped trace the money order Oswald used to purchase the rifle from which he allegedly used to kill President Kennedy, joined that group. Holmes' inclusion extended the interrogation by at least half an hour. In addition, Oswald requested to wear a sweater, which delayed the transfer even further. As a result, that allowed enough time for a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby to arrive at the station. And during the transfer, Ruby stepped from the crowd, pulled out a revolver, pointed it at Oswald's abdomen, and pulled the trigger. Well, just think about it. Imagine that moment. You got your hands on the most wanted man in America. Security should be tighter than anything the Dallas police had ever seen. But a man steps out of nowhere, walks right past the police, guns down America's most wanted assassin. You think it was a conspiracy theory after JFK's death? Now you got a situation seemed almost designed to create an atmosphere of distrust, paranoia, and suspicion. which is exactly what greeted the official government investigations. Well, 6 days after the assassination, President Lyndon, I'm going to be King Johnson, aware of the rumors and suspicions, authorized the commission to examine the tragic event. He appointed Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren to head that committee, which quickly became known as the Warren Commission. This blue ribbon commission, made up of senators and congressmen from both major parties, as well as a former CIA director, who had been fired by Kennedy, I might add, spent 10 months going through evidence, eyewitness accounts, and testimonies from experts. Among the questions they wanted to have answered: how many shooters were involved? Did the assassins serve a larger goal than murdering the president? Was there a conspiracy behind the killing of JFK? But when it was completed, the commission's 888-page report reached a stark conclusion. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, fired the shots that killed President Kennedy and wounded Texas Governor Connally, was not part of a larger conspiracy. And Jack Ruby, who shot and killed Oswald at Dallas Police Headquarters, also acted alone, was not part of any larger conspiracy. According to Ruby, he just wanted to keep Jackie from having to come back to Dallas for a trial. Well, did you know that after Ruby killed Oswald, he took a polygraph test against the advice of his own lawyer to prove he wasn't involved in the mob? Amazingly enough, he passed. In addition, both commissions found no proof Ruby was ever connected to the mafia, even though they made his nightclub almost an official office. With the release of the Warren Commission report, the commission itself became the centerpiece of the rapidly multiplying conspiracy scenarios. In 1976, the House of Representatives appointed a select committee on assassinations to review the killing of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and the shooting of George Wallace. And their findings, released in 1979, were that President Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. And there was a high probability that existing that 2 gunmen were firing at the president. Excuse me. So why the difference in outcome? Well, the House Select Committee relied almost exclusively on an acoustical study based on a recording presumed to have been made in Dealey Plaza that was not examined by the Warren Commission. In fact, our own government couldn't decide what actually happened. Well, if Jack Ruby hadn't killed Lee Harvey Oswald, we'd have all the answers. Or at least we'd know the right questions to ask. Who were you working for? What did you mean by Patsy? Were you the only shooter? Instead, thanks to Jack Ruby, there were thousands of new theories that were born. And most of them came from who Ruby was. Kind of penny ante nightclub owner you've seen in dozens of cliche movies and novels. Hung around with strippers and gamblers and rumored to have connections to organized crime. And even though he wasn't a deacon of the church, he had a fierce patriotism and deep admiration for President and Mrs. Kennedy. So what was his motive? As I said, he didn't want the First Lady to have to come back to Dallas and go through the agony of Oswald's inevitable trial. Well, one thing we need to look at is how fast did conspiracy theories spread in the days before the internet took place. Well, within days of JFK's assassination, more than half of the people surveyed believed there was more than one shooter involved. After the Warren Commission report was released, a whopping 87% believed there was multiple shooters. And as recently as 2003, 75% of people polled believed the Kennedy assassination was, in fact, part of a conspiracy. Well, everything Ruby had to say made a good story, made sense. But something else also made a good story. A guy with underworld ties steps into the police station and with a few pulls of the trigger closes the final loose end for everybody. And it's even better when you think about it from this point of view. How much did Ruby really admire Kennedy, considering he didn't even watch the parade? At that time, he was at the Dallas Morning News discussing his weekly ad in the newspaper. In the end, it's tough to tell which version's true. But let's look at the actual moment. That Sunday morning, after taking care of some business at Western Union, he went to police headquarters where he was a known figure. People said hello, but nobody stopped him or asked him what he was doing there. Note that Ruby was at the Oswald Midnight Press Conference, so it was only that was held on Friday could have shot Oswald then. According to prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, who's reclaiming history as the authoritative 1,600-page analysis of the assassination, had there been a line at the Western Union office, or even one person ahead of Jack Ruby in line, the transfer of Oswald to the county jail would have been completed before Ruby was finished at the telegraph office. To Bugliosi, mafia hitmen don't take those kind of chances or cut things that close. Well, timing is, in fact, everything. But nobody taught us that better than Jack Ruby. March 14, 1964, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Instead, he died in prison nearly 3 years later in 1967. He didn't die right after his act, as many people believed. Official cause of his death, pulmonary embolism. Well, when Abraham Lincoln was shot, it was easy to know who wanted him dead, but in JFK's complex, interconnected world, a number of people wanted him dead. It reads like a bad guy laundry list. The Soviet Union, who better to kill our great leader than our greatest enemy? The Cubans and Castro, right-wing Cubans, were bitter over Kennedy's abandonment of the Bay of Pigs invasion and could have killed him for revenge. Left-wing Cubans who were loyal to the Soviet Union could have acted at their behest. And don't forget, Oswald, allegedly, was a Cuba supporter. Then you got right-wing conservatives and Texas millionaires who hated Kennedy's liberal stance on, among other things, race relations. The CIA and the military-industrial complex were enraged at Kennedy for his stance on Vietnam. He was going to shut that war down. The mafia was supposedly livid about the Kennedy administration's ongoing investigations and prosecutions. And the deaths of both Marilyn Monroe and Bobby Kennedy only added to the theory. And of course, there was the Dallas Police, the Secret Service, and LBJ himself. Each theory with even more moving parts than the one before. Point is, whoever the finger gets pointed at, it goes back to the one belief people can't shake. The idea that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have pulled it off alone. Well, if you read An American Coup, I talk about a number of folks who had even more urging to commit such a crime than the folks you normally hear about. On the day JFK was shot, the crowds in Dallas's Dealey Plaza heard the sound of gunshots. And for 50 years now, the question remains, how many shots did they hear and where exactly did that fourth shot come from? Warren Commission said beyond a doubt only 3 shots were fired, representing the 3 bullet casings found in the book depository. And in 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations had access to sound recording that the Warren Commission didn't. Concluded there was a 95% chance or better that a noise as loud as a rifle shot was fired. They believed this to be the third of 4 shots, and it didn't come from the book depository. So where did it come from? Allegedly, the elevated piece of land known as the Grassy Knoll, right to the right front of the passing presidential limo. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll talk more about the Kennedy assassination in future shows, but until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.